My wife and I are both liars. She has lied to me 1,000 times, promising she would finally move on from her first love, but she never actually followed through. As for me, I only ever told her one lie. I tricked her into signing a divorce decree that I had hidden inside our wedding renewal papers. Today marks the final day of the mandatory divorce cooling-off period, and the countdown is down to 3 hours. I have finished packing all my bags and booked a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. With 2 hours remaining, I shredded every single photograph of us together. Now, my albums only contain pictures of myself. When the clock hit the 1-hour mark, I recorded a final video for her. I told her that this was the 10th year of my love for her, but also the first day of my life without her. When she finally watched it later, she completely lost her mind. Ava frowned as she flipped through the stack of papers, wondering why the agreement was so thick. She hesitated, her pen hovering over the paper without making a mark. She was a high-profile CEO in Chicago, after all, and certainly not the type of person you could easily deceive. I had carefully hidden a divorce decree on the very last page of the document. I kept my head down, surprisingly calm despite what I was doing. I told her that there were a lot of compensation clauses included and suggested she should read them over if she had a moment. I knew she wouldn't bother checking. Today was the day her first love, Ethan Reed, was flying back into the country. Years ago, when Ethan got engaged to someone else, she married me out of spite. Now that Ethan was divorced, she had suddenly decided to hold a grand wedding ceremony with me to save face. This whole performance was just a way to bait Ethan into coming back to her. My marriage had never been anything more than a pawn in their game. As I expected, Ava looked incredibly annoyed by the delay. She told me she had to pick someone up and didn't have time to waste on paperwork. The flash of joy in her eyes was heartbreaking. Her irritation was for me, while her excitement was reserved entirely for Ethan. Ava scribbled her signature on the documents and walked out without a second glance. Just 3 days prior, she had suddenly brought up the idea of redoing our wedding ceremony. We had already been married for 5 years, but we never had a real ceremony or a public announcement. Only our parents and a handful of close friends were even aware that we were husband and wife. Her professional profile still listed her status as single. Whenever the tabloids mentioned her name, it was always in the context of her dramatic, long-standing history with Ethan. As the husband she kept hidden in the shadows, I never had the right to stand by her side in public. I always knew that Ethan was the only man she had ever truly loved, the first love she could never move past. She was occasionally kind to me during our 5 years together, though those moments were rare. I had hoped that my devotion would eventually make her comfortable having me in her life. Despite my efforts, Ava never seemed truly happy in our home. That changed the night she came home completely wasted, despite usually being able to hold her liquor. She spent the entire night laughing with a joy I had never seen before. I did some digging and discovered that Ethan had just finalized his divorce. While I was taking care of her that night, I used Ethan's birthday to unlock her phone. Her photo gallery was packed with thousands of pictures of him, and not a single one of me. The cover of her digital album was our wedding portrait, but my face had been photoshopped out and replaced with Ethan's. I remembered how she refused a ceremony when we got married, but insisted on those photos. Now I knew why. The truth was finally clear to me. In that moment, everything about our marriage made perfect sense. Our 5-year marriage was finally reaching its breaking point. All I had to do was survive the final stretch of the divorce cooling-off period. There was exactly 1 month left. Ironically, the wedding ceremony Ava was so insistent on redoing was also scheduled for 1 month from today. 20 days remained on the clock. Ava was becoming increasingly busy, constantly rushing in and out of the house. The wedding she had so solemnly promised seemed to have been completely forgotten. Occasionally, I would see posts on her best friend's Facebook where she was visible in the background, clinging to another man's arm. I recognized that face immediately. I had seen it thousands of times in her phone. One afternoon, my business partner told me to grab my designs because we were heading out to sign a contract with a new client. He mentioned that the client was rumored to be Ava's secret boyfriend. I just nodded, my mind miles away from the conversation. Even though we were partners, He had no idea I even knew Ava, let alone that we were in a secret marriage. The client's office was conveniently located right below Ava's headquarters. I knew exactly what was going on. Ethan had opened this firm with heavy investment from the Miller family. The business news had been obsessed with dredging up their old romance lately. When we stepped into the executive suite, I wasn't surprised to see Ava there. She was in the middle of handing a beautifully wrapped gift to the man sitting behind the desk. She was mid-sentence, calling his name, when she saw me and completely froze. The tension in the room became so thick that everyone present felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Ethan gave me a long, curious look that seemed almost mocking. He asked who I was. Ava hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words to describe our relationship. I forced a smile and stepped forward to break the silence, introducing myself as James, the lead designer, and mentioned I was Ava's friend. Old college classmate. Ava and I blurted out in perfect, rehearsed unison. My hand went cold as soon as the words left my mouth, and I gripped my sketches so hard I left indentations in the paper. This was far from the first time I had to help her maintain a lie. It wasn't the first time she had deliberately erased my presence from her life. This secret marriage of ours was a double-edged sword. It hid the truth from the world while making our eventual downfall painfully obvious. The meeting went downhill quickly after that. Ava immediately reverted to her ruthless CEO persona, siding entirely with Ethan and pushing us hard on every single point of the negotiation. She demanded a further 10% discount, effectively squeezing our profit margins until there was almost nothing left. My partner hesitated for a few seconds before finally giving in with a reluctant nod, muttering about how Ava truly lived up to her reputation for being heartless. She knew our breaking point better than anyone else in the room. She kept her head turned away, and for the first time in our relationship, she couldn't bring herself to look me in the eye. She was every bit as cold and calculating as the business world claimed. The only difference this time was that she was using her lethal negotiation tactics against her own husband. Ethan stayed quiet most of the time, only shooting me the occasional smug look. Eventually, he reached for the gift box on his desk and offered me a piece of cake. To my surprise, Ava, who had been an ice queen throughout the meeting, suddenly panicked and snatched the cake from his hand, frantically warning him to be careful because of his peanut allergy. That moment felt like a physical blow to my chest. In 5 years, she had never managed to remember our anniversary or even get my birthday right. She seemed to forget every single thing that was important to me. But I had always held on to the fact that she remembered my peanut allergy as a sign that she might actually care. I used to tell myself that her forgetting the small things was just a personality quirk, not a lack of love. I clung to the idea that her knowing my allergy meant there was still a spark of affection left. Now I realized that even that small piece of concern was a lie. She only remembered the allergy because of Ethan. The project was moving at a brisk pace, but Ava kept pushing for it to go even faster. She repeatedly told my business partner that this was Ethan's debut project in the States, and she wouldn't tolerate any errors. I watched her obsession unfold with complete detachment, as if I were a spectator watching a movie. When we got home after the meeting, Ava sat on the couch for a long time, looking like she wanted to say something. She eventually tried to explain that our secret marriage made things complicated and that she would go public when the timing was right. She insisted that the most important thing at the moment was making sure the project was a success. I just nodded silently. I didn't bother pointing out that her actual priority should have been the wedding she had promised me. I certainly wasn't going to mention that by the time she was ready to go public, our divorce would already be finalized. To her, Ethan was the only person who truly mattered. While the project was underway, Ava tried to be discreet about how often I was meeting with Ethan. However, my business partner started picking up on the strange vibes between us. He asked me in a suggestive tone if Ava and I had a history together. I just laughed it off and told him he was being ridiculous. My partner just snorted and said that the way she looked at me was full of guilt, the kind of look a woman only gives to an ex-boyfriend she feels bad about. I went quiet, thinking about all the times she had avoided my gaze lately. I had sensed the shift in her behavior for a long time, but I had been too afraid to acknowledge what those looks really meant. With only 10 days left in the cooling-off period, Ethan asked me to stay behind after a routine meeting. He spent a long time making small talk, clearly digging for information. He was being cryptic, but I could tell he suspected that my relationship with Ava wasn't strictly professional. I stayed polite and answered his questions as briefly as possible without giving anything away. After the meeting ended, Ava surprisingly offered to drive me home. She even went so far as to tell me that my work on the project had exceeded her expectations. In 5 years of marriage, that was the very first time she had ever given me a genuine compliment. I paused while packing up my bag and looked at her, completely caught off guard. After a long silence, she finally asked if it would be okay to postpone the wedding. I looked down, knowing exactly what she was getting at. She wanted to call it off because of Ethan. I told her we should just cancel it altogether since there were so few days left anyway. I didn't want to start an argument or make things more awkward than they already were. Ava looked shocked by my response, as if she couldn't believe I was letting her off the hook so easily. She asked me if I really didn't mind. If this had happened a year ago, I probably would have lost my temper and demanded to know what was going on. Most of our worst fights had started because I couldn't handle the way she treated me. Even though she was always the one who provoked me, I had learned to stay calm. I just shook my head and told her that a wedding was just a pointless ceremony anyway. After another long pause, Ava suggested taking a trip to a historic town nearby to unwind. I checked my phone and saw that there were only 10 days left until our divorce was final. I turned her down without a second thought. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened so much her knuckles turned white, and she nearly blew through a red light. She started listing other places we could go, like the coast or that expensive steakhouse I used to talk about, but I rejected every single suggestion. By the time we pulled up to my place, her guilt had turned into visible annoyance. I could see she was getting upset, so I suggested we go visit our old apartment instead. That apartment was the first place we lived as a married couple. Honestly, I found myself actually missing the memories of those early days. Ava seemed confused by my suggestion, as if she were trying to find a hidden meaning in my words. She sat in the car for a long time, even after I had already stepped out onto the sidewalk. There was only 1 day left in the cooling-off period. We had both been avoiding each other during the final phase of the project, whether by accident or on purpose. Whenever Ethan wasn't around, Ava would slip into our meetings and watch from the back of the room. She wouldn't say a word. She would just stand there and watch me work. I didn't care enough to wonder what was going on in her head anymore. I had started quietly moving my belongings out of the house, doing my best to make sure she didn't notice. She eventually caught on. After one of our meetings, she asked me to come to her office so we could talk. She immediately asked why I'd been moving things out and why I hadn't been home in days. I just gave her the excuse I had prepared, telling her I had been spending time at our old apartment. Ava hesitated before bringing up the wedding again, saying we still had time to make it happen. I cut her off mid-sentence, telling her that time had already run out. She looked confused and asked me what I meant by that. I stayed silent for a moment, debating whether or not to just show her the divorce papers I had already signed. Ethan called her at that exact moment, which gave me the perfect exit. I saw his name on her screen and told her to take the call, saying we could talk about our situation later. Ava looked a little guilty as she held the door open, promising me that she would come to the old apartment to see me the next day. Predictably, she never showed up. I sat alone on the sofa in the old apartment, watching the timer on my phone hit the 12-hour mark. A news notification popped up on my phone showing Ethan at a press conference with Ava standing right behind him. I couldn't help but laugh when I remembered the promise she had made me just yesterday. I wondered if she would have still ditched me if she knew these were the last 12 hours of our marriage. Maybe she would have stayed, or maybe she wouldn't have cared. Either way, the answer didn't matter anymore. I spent a few more hours cleaning and packing until there was nothing of mine left in the apartment. This place had been our first home after we got our marriage license, but now it felt like a stranger's house. I still felt a pang of sadness leaving it behind. I called my business partner to say a final goodbye, even though we had already discussed my move to London. I then called my lawyer to confirm that everything was in order since the agreement was notarized a month ago. He told me that there was nothing else I needed to do. After a moment of silence, the lawyer added a quick "Congratulations, James," before we hung up. I just smiled and put the phone down. I sat in silence until the sun began to set. With 3 hours left, I finished packing my last bag and confirmed my flight for the next morning. At the 2-hour mark, I took every photo of the two of us and cut them into tiny pieces. I made sure that the only photos left in the house were of me alone. With only 1 hour remaining, I placed the signed divorce papers neatly on the coffee table. I thought about leaving a note, but I realized there was nothing left to say. In the end, I left the table empty. I just said a silent goodbye in my head, thinking about how I had loved her for 10 years and how exhausting that had been. I was finally ready to move on, and I wished us both the best in our new lives. As the timer finally hit 0, I picked up my suitcase and reached for the doorknob. Our marriage was officially over. To my surprise, the door swung open before I could touch it. Ava came bursting in, drenched in sweat and gasping for air as if she had just sprinted the whole way there. She gave me a guilty smile and started apologizing for being late, saying she had been dropping someone off. Her voice trailed off when she saw my suitcase and the plane ticket in my hand, and she asked me where I was going. I showed her the ticket, which was for a city on the complete opposite side of the country. She immediately got upset and demanded to know why I was leaving without telling her, asking what she was supposed to do if there was an emergency. I just shrugged and told her it was a routine job transfer and that there was no reason to worry. She grabbed my wrist, clearly not buying my excuse, and pointed out that the project had only just finished. I slowly pried her fingers off my arm and took a step back to create some space. I explained that the project was basically done and that my partner would handle the rest while I moved on to new things. That single step away from her seemed to crush her. She stood there staring at me, her hands still outstretched and trembling, but she refused to let it drop. She seemed to realize what was happening and asked me when I was planning on coming back. I just shook my head and told her that I wasn't coming back at all. Ava's face fell instantly, and she looked like she was about to burst into tears. She stared at me in total shock and tried to reach for me again, but I kept backing away to keep her from touching me. She looked like an abandoned dog, wanting to come closer, but terrified of being rejected again. She suddenly turned and ran out of the apartment, only to return a few minutes later, clutching a massive bouquet of roses. There must have been 1,000 roses in that bouquet. In all the years we had been together, we had never shared a romantic gesture that was even close to this dramatic. She thrust the flowers toward me and begged me not to go, saying that the wedding for the weekend was already bought and paid for. She promised me that she would spend the entire week by my side if I just stayed. I stared at the roses, but all I could think about was the time I had asked her for a single flower right after we got married. She had flatly refused me back then. I eventually found her diary and learned that she believed roses were a sacred symbol of love that should only be given to the person you truly cared about. Looking at the massive bouquet now, I felt nothing but a strange sense of peace. It was in that moment that I realized I had finally stopped loving her. I took the flowers from her hands and, without saying a word, walked over to the trash can by the door and dropped them right in. Ava's expression shifted from total shock to complete emptiness in a matter of seconds. I suppose this should have felt like a triumphant moment of revenge, but I didn't feel anything at all. Nothing she did could hurt me anymore. She tried to say my name, but the words seemed to die in her throat. She looked like she realized that anything she said would just be met with another rejection. She knew there were no words left that could change my mind. She was never going to get the answer she wanted from me again. I told her I didn't want her flowers and that it was time for me to go. That was the first time in 5 years I had ever used her name so formally. I truly hoped it would be the last. I pulled my suitcases out of the apartment, taking every last bit of my life with me. Ava stood in the doorway looking into the empty rooms, which now felt cold and lifeless without any of my things. The apartment looked like a staged model home, completely devoid of personality. Ava suddenly panicked and grabbed my suitcase, begging to know if I was really never coming back. I pulled the suitcase away from her one last time and made it clear that since we were divorced, I had absolutely no reason to ever see her again. Ava's eyes went wide with shock when she heard the word divorce. She looked like she thought I was joking or that she was hearing things. She tried to force a laugh and shook her head, telling me that it was impossible. She wanted to grab me, but she was too afraid to move toward me while I kept backing away. She seemed terrified that if she made one wrong move, I would disappear forever. We stood there in a tense, awkward standoff in the hallway. She asked me if I was joking, but her voice was so shaky that it was clear she already knew the truth. She started rambling about how I had never mentioned a divorce and how she would never agree to one. She was completely falling apart right in front of me. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing, so I just turned and started walking toward the elevator. I told her that the divorce papers were on the table and she could read them herself. I called an Uber to take me to the airport, while Ava ran back into the apartment as fast as she could. She found the divorce papers sitting right where I left them on the coffee table. Her own signature was right there at the bottom, written in her distinct, elegant handwriting. She recognized her own signature immediately, even if she had no memory of actually signing the document. She had signed her own divorce papers without even realizing it. My phone started buzzing with calls from Ava while I was on my way to the airport, but I didn't answer. I just took out my SIM card and snapped it in half. The driver saw what I did and made a joke about me having a fight with my girlfriend. I just told him she wasn't my girlfriend anymore. She was my ex-wife. The driver was a real talker and immediately started asking if she had cheated on me or why I felt the need to cut her off so completely. I didn't really know how to answer that question. I had no idea if Ava and Ethan had actually slept together or if it was just emotional infidelity. She was always very careful to maintain appearances, never giving anyone a reason to gossip. Ethan played the part of the perfect gentleman, acting like he was nothing more than her loyal business associate. I just gave him a vague answer, which only encouraged him to keep talking. He spent the rest of the trip complaining about everything from modern marriage to his own lazy son-in-law. I guess I had accidentally hit a nerve with him. I just sat there and let him vent for the rest of the drive to the airport. Before I knew it, we had arrived at the terminal. I grabbed my bags, checked in for my flight, and headed toward the security checkpoint. I had about 90 minutes before my flight was scheduled to depart. I was finally going to be free from the 10 years of misery I had endured. I was just about to walk through the security gate when the crowd behind me suddenly parted. Ava came running toward me, completely out of breath, and literally dragged me out of the line. She held up the divorce papers and ripped them into tiny pieces right in front of my face. She screamed that she had never signed them and that they weren't valid. I just looked at the scraps of paper scattered all over the floor and told her she shouldn't litter in a public place. Ava looked completely bewildered by my reaction. I could tell she couldn't believe I was worried about trash at a time like this. She kicked the scraps of paper out of the way and grabbed my arm, trying to pull me toward the exit. She told me she wouldn't accept the divorce and demanded that we get married all over again. I nearly lost my balance, but managed to steady myself. I reminded her that she was the one who signed the papers, and that it wasn't my fault she hadn't bothered to read them when I told her to. She wasn't even listening to me. She just kept trying to drag me away. No matter how hard she pulled, I refused to move an inch. I knew she wasn't really trying to force me. She was just testing to see if I would give in and follow her. I have always been incredibly stubborn, and once I make up my mind, there's no changing it. Ava was the only person in the world who could ever make me compromise. 4 or 5 years, I had consistently abandoned my own principles just to give her whatever she wanted. Because I had always given in, she had grown used to the idea that she could always get her way by leveraging my love for her. She was trying the same tactic again, hoping to make me stay, but I refused to budge. She eventually let go of my hand, finally realizing that the man who used to love her so much was gone. Ava stood there in the middle of the crowded airport, surrounded by scraps of paper and the curious whispers of passing travelers. She had never been humiliated like this in her entire life. She didn't move for a long time before finally kneeling down and carefully picking up every single scrap of paper. She clutched them to her chest, as if those pieces of paper could somehow bring me back to her. By then, I was already high above the clouds on my way to the West Coast. I had no idea about the dramatic scene she was making back at the airport. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders as I landed in Los Angeles. The first thing I did was buy a new SIM card and call my partner to let him know I had arrived safely. I went through all my social media and blocked anyone who was even remotely connected to Ava. I didn't even bother watching the videos people sent me of her crying at the airport. I just deleted them all immediately. Once my phone was cleared of her presence, I felt a sense of relief. I threw myself into setting up our new office and began the process of relocating our operations to California. I was working so hard that I didn't even have time to think about my personal life. I realized that life was much more enjoyable when I wasn't constantly worrying about someone else's feelings. My partner called me for a video meeting, sounding incredibly excited as he told me that the project back in Chicago had been a total success. He said there were some hurdles along the way, but we managed to hit all our targets without losing any profit. I casually asked him what had happened after I left. He mentioned that the representative from the Miller Group had made a massive mistake and had been fired on the spot. He joked about how Ava used to treat the guy like a spoiled pet and how he had assumed they were having an affair, but apparently she didn't care about him enough to save his job. I couldn't help but let out a laugh at that. It was typical of Ava. Even when we were married, she never hesitated to screw me over if it benefited her business. Her obsession with Ethan had clearly just been a passing fancy that didn't survive a real-world mistake. Ava was the kind of woman who only ever truly cared about herself. My partner eventually told me that he would be joining me in Los Angeles soon to help grow the business. We had worked together for so long that saying goodbye was tough, so I was genuinely touched that he was willing to move across the country to keep working with me. I started out with a tiny office and one assistant. Every day after work, I'd take her downstairs to the bakery for some treats as a thank you for all her hard work. The baker was a stunning woman with long, dark hair who always seemed to be wearing a white dress. My assistant was obsessed with her desserts. One afternoon, my assistant was so stressed out that she practically begged me to go get her some sugar. When I got to the bakery, I found out they were completely sold out for the day. The owner told me she was about to put a fresh batch in the oven and asked me to wait. I sat at the counter and watched the news on the iPad she had set up for customers. I was busy texting my assistant to tell her the cake was on its way when I heard Ava's name on the news. I looked up and saw her face on the screen. She was wearing a prominent ring while being interviewed by a reporter. The reporter asked if she had recently gotten married, since she had never worn a ring in public before. Ava shook her head and claimed she had been married for 5 years already, but had kept it a secret for personal reasons. The press corps was stunned by the revelation and immediately started shouting questions about why she had chosen to wait so long to go public. Ava put on a dramatic show of emotion for the cameras, looking heartbroken as she claimed she had messed up and didn't deserve to be recognized by her husband. Her little performance went viral almost instantly. Within minutes, people were already making TikTok edits of her tragic love story and posting them all over the internet. I couldn't tell if people were just bored or if Ava had hired a PR firm to spread the story. Either way, the whole thing made me feel sick to my stomach. The beautiful owner came back with the fresh cakes and joked that I looked like I had just found a bug in my dessert. I pointed at the iPad and told her that the news story was making me sick. I joked that she owed me a discount for having to endure such a terrible video. She laughed and handed me an extra piece of cake, saying it was a new flavor she wanted me to try. She told me the extra cake was my compensation and asked for my feedback on it. I didn't hesitate to take a big bite. A week after that, my business partner finally made it to Los Angeles. He was so jet-lagged that he was practically paralyzed in his hotel room. I ended up having to go over there to bring him some food and help him get settled. He was so exhausted that he just handed me a folder and asked me to take the meeting with a new client the next morning. I couldn't believe he was still thinking about business while he was this sick. I agreed to go in his place since it was our joint project, and it didn't really matter which one of us handled the negotiation. I immediately regretted my decision the moment I reached the conference room and saw who the client was. I called my partner right then and there and demanded to know why he hadn't told me the client was Ava. Even though he was exhausted, he suddenly sounded very awake the moment I mentioned her name. He swore he hadn't made a mistake, and while I was still trying to figure out what was going on, Ava walked up behind me. She told me that she had specifically requested this meeting because she wanted to see me. I slowly turned around to face her. Ava kept her distance, standing several feet away as if she were afraid I might snap at her. She was being incredibly careful with her words, clearly trying not to set me off. She told me she knew I didn't want to see her, but she begged for another chance. I just rolled my eyes and asked her if she wanted another chance for me to kick her out. I didn't even bother staying for the meeting. My partner ended up calling the client and tearing into them for being unprofessional and changing the representative without any warning. The client's representative was so stunned by his outburst that they didn't even try to defend themselves. Once my partner had finished venting, he surprisingly suggested that we should go ahead with the deal anyway. I thought he had lost his mind, but then he explained that he wanted to give her a false sense of hope, just so he could watch her fail later. He told me that her arrogance was disgusting and that he wanted to teach her a lesson. It was then that I realized I truly didn't care about her anymore. She was the one who had forced her way back into my peaceful life and threatened to mess up all my plans. Given the circumstances, my partner's idea was starting to sound pretty good. My partner finally started feeling better after a couple of days. As soon as he was back on his feet, he promised to help me secure my future. He set up a meeting with Ava that same day to discuss the project. Apparently, she was ecstatic when she heard that I had agreed to work with her. I found the whole situation hilarious. When I was the one begging for her attention, she couldn't have cared less. Now, even the smallest thing I did seemed to have a massive impact on her. The irony of the situation was almost too much to handle. The most ridiculous part was when she staged a massive public confession outside my office building right as the project was wrapping up. She set up heart-shaped candles on the sidewalk and stood there with a cake and flowers, screaming for me to marry her. I was actually in the bakery upstairs ordering a cake for our project wrap party when I heard her screaming. I nearly dropped my phone in shock. The owner immediately realized what was happening and asked if I was the James she was shouting for. I quickly hushed her and begged her to keep it down. The owner was furious about the scene Ava was making outside her shop. She complained that the noise was going to drive away all her customers and ruin her business. She stormed out of the shop to confront Ava while I tried to peek out from behind the door. The crowd outside was so loud that I couldn't make out anything they were saying. I could see the owner gesturing for Ava to leave, but Ava was refusing to budge. She eventually looked up and caught me watching from the doorway. She brushed past the owner and ran right up to me, thrusting the flowers into my hands and asking me to marry her. It was completely absurd. We had nothing when we first got married, and I never could have imagined a day like this. It was beyond ironic that 5 years later, she was the one down on one knee proposing to me. The sad truth was that I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. I just took the flowers and tossed them aside. I kicked the cake over and told her to get lost. I didn't have another single word to say to her. Whatever plan my partner had was ruined now that she had made such a disgusting scene. I felt no satisfaction in seeing her like this. Ava looked like she couldn't believe I was being so cold. She tried to get up and grab me again, but the bakery owner stepped in and told her to stop embarrassing herself. She reminded Ava that I had already told her to leave. Ava was desperate with me, but she was incredibly rude to the owner. She looked her up and down before turning back to me and yelling again. She asked me if I was rejecting her for a woman who just owned a little bakery. She sneered and said the woman probably couldn't even afford her own rent. I was about to defend the owner when she held up a finger and told Ava she was mistaken. She calmly explained that she didn't have to pay rent because she owned the entire building. She mentioned that she just baked cakes for fun because she had nothing better to do. I was completely floored by that revelation. I had no idea that the woman I had been buying cakes from was actually my landlord. I went back to my office and checked the lease agreement just to be sure. She told me that the building was in her mother's name, but since her mother was currently on vacation, she was the one in charge of everything. Technically, she was telling the truth. I just stood there staring at her, unable to believe my luck. I ended up taking all the leftover cakes from the shop that day without paying. I went back the next morning to settle the tab and apologize for my behavior. I knew she didn't need the money, so I brought her a small gift for the shop as a way of saying thank you. It was a small token of my appreciation for her helping me with Ava. She didn't say much at first, but then she asked me if I wanted to get rid of Ava for good. She was obviously talking about Ava. She had probably overheard my partner and I brainstorming ways to deal with her. She told me that our plan was way too soft and offered to handle everything for me. She even promised that she could make sure I got some money out of the deal. My partner was all for it, saying that I deserved some compensation after everything Ava had put me through. I thought about it for a minute before finally agreeing to her plan. She didn't waste any time. The very next day, she showed up at my office in a sharp business suit, looking completely different from the woman who baked my cakes. I was completely speechless. My assistant was even more shocked and could barely contain her excitement. All I could manage to say was how cool she looked. Once she got to work, she started systematically taking down Ava's business interests. Within 3 days, Ava had announced that she was pulling out of the market entirely. She came to see me before she left and asked if I was the one behind it. I didn't give her a straight answer, but she just laughed and said she would accept any outcome as long as it made me happy. I realized then that Ava had some serious issues. I told her to just move on with her life because our relationship was dead and buried. She just gave me a sad smile, nodded, and walked out of my life for good. I haven't heard from her since. With the owner's help and guidance, we were able to move into a much better office and officially launch our new firm. We held our grand opening party at her bakery. For that one night, the smell of cakes and coffee was replaced by the aroma of a delicious hot pot feast. The iPad was still on the counter, but this time of news was reporting that Ava had resigned from her position at the Miller Group following the company's bankruptcy. I turned off the news and switched to a comedy special instead. We all raised our glasses and toasted to a future that was finally looking bright and full of promise. James loved Ava for 10 years and spent 5 of those as her husband. Her heart always belonged to Ethan, her first love, and she had even photoshopped James out of their own wedding pictures to put Ethan's face there instead. Some people will ignore every bit of your devotion while you are right in front of them, only to start chasing after you the second you finally walk away. James eventually won because he finally found the strength to leave for good. Now Ava's company has collapsed into bankruptcy, and her first love, Ethan, has been fired from his position. Never waste your life on someone who refuses to love you back. You need to learn how to value and love yourself before you can find happiness with anyone else.